Welcome to Hacking Your Leadership. I'm Chris, and welcome to this week's Thoughtful Thursday. A huge thank you to everyone listening right now, especially those of you who tune in every Monday and Thursday. Don't forget to follow us on Instagram at Hacking Your Leadership and leave us a review on iTunes. Also, if you find value in this episode and you aren't already a subscriber, we'd love it if you'd subscribe to our show now. For this week's episode, I want to talk about giving feedback. We all give feedback. We give it to our bosses, our peers, and the people who report to us. We also give it to our romantic partners, our friends, and our family members. Feedback is part of all interpersonal relationships, but there are undoubtedly some people who give it better than others, and also some people who receive it better than others. In many organizations, leaders are tasked with giving the majority of feedback, partly because the job of the leader typically has more opportunities to notice times when feedback is required, but also because there seems to be a widespread aversion to confrontation between peers in the workforce nowadays, which means when one employee has an issue or a problem with another, they go to the leader and expect them to solve the problem and dole out some accountability, rather than giving the feedback to the other employee themselves. This can lead to many leaders being viewed negatively by employees who start to believe the leader spends all their time being critical. But the problem isn't that people don't know how to give feedback. The problem is that they haven't earned the right to give it in the first place. Every person in my life can be put into one of two groups: people with whom I have a relationship that has mutual trust, and people with whom I don't. There are far more people in the second group than the first, but the lack of a mutually trusting relationship isn't necessarily a bad thing. We all have coworkers we see walking through our workplaces every day. People who are cheery, who never fail to smile or say hi when passing. People who we think of highly and know of as competent employees. People we assume are really good people. This doesn't mean we have a mutually trusting relationship with them, though, and it definitely doesn't mean they've earned the right to give us feedback. I know plenty of people in the companies I consult with who are incredibly nice people, but who would throw me off my game a little bit if they approached me with feedback out of the blue. But I also know people at these same companies who could give me feedback whenever they wanted. It wouldn't bother me at all, and I would take their advice to heart. So what determines whether a person falls in the first group or the second? How does a relationship earn the trust needed to make feedback effective? How does a person earn the right to give you feedback? This is a process, and it occurs slowly over time. It takes a step forward or a step backward after every single interaction you have with a person. The more interactions, the more opportunities you have to paint a picture of who you are, but more importantly, what your motivations are. On Hacking Your Leadership, Lorenzo and I often make parenting references. We're both parents of young children, and we believe there are several parallels between parenting and leadership, and this topic is one of those. I give my children feedback constantly. Sometimes it's accompanied by laughter and smiles, other times by scowls and punishment. But my motivation behind every single feedback session is the same. It's to make them better at something. And not better so it'll make my life easier, better because it will serve them well as they grow up. I want to see them succeed at everything they attempt, and I know my ability to give them feedback will determine their ability to take feedback and ultimately whether or not they succeed. So the feedback I give is not a punishment, and it certainly isn't venting or complaining either. And this is the first litmus test for whether you can give a person feedback. Are you motivated by improving them, or are you motivated by making your own life easier? If it's the latter, you might as well stop before you begin, because the feedback won't land well and you'll hurt the relationship with this person. And here's the hard part. It's not enough to have the right motivation. The person you're giving feedback to needs to believe you have the right motivation. And the only way to ensure this is to show them with your actions daily. And this is the second part. In order to earn the right to give critical feedback, it needs to be less than half of all the feedback you give to a person. That means more than half the interactions you have with a person need to include some sort of positive feedback. Feedback that's specific to an action or a behavior, not an outcome. Because while behaviors and actions can be reliably replicated, outcomes cannot. This is how you build the relationship needed to earn the right to give critical feedback. Because people who want you to succeed never fail to notice when you do. And people who are just trying to make their own jobs easier tend to only notice the things that make their job harder. So what happens after you look at yourself in the mirror and say you honestly are motivated by improving the other person for them and not for you, and you've also given them plenty of positive feedback in recent weeks? How do you know you've earned the right to give them critical feedback? This is the third part. The first few times you give critical feedback to a person, it needs to be objectively correct. This means there can be no gray area and there can't be multiple ways to accomplish the thing you're giving feedback about. Typically, this means it must be about something procedural. In most companies, there's a process for many things. And if a person is doing something incorrectly, and you can articulate the only proper way to do it, you should. And the reason why critical feedback must begin here is because there's an impartial third party, whatever the procedure is. With procedural things, no one gets to make a judgment call on whose way is better because there's simply the way of doing it. When critical feedback is given on something procedural, the leader is saying, the company has provided a way to do this, and here it is. But when feedback is given on something that lives in the gray, the leader is essentially saying, my way is better than your way. And you can't tell a person that your way is better than their way unless the two of you are in a relationship with mutual trust. If you're a leader and you find it difficult to give feedback to some of your people reporting to you, it means you instinctively understand there's no relationship except the one defined by your titles. And while your job may grant you the authority to give feedback, only the relationship can make the feedback land correctly. It takes time and it takes effort, but everything worth it usually does. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you on Monday.